the Democrats had basically won the biggest policy battle of our time, but it doesn't really feel that way. So for more than a decade, Republicans have riled up their inbred base with vows to repeal Obamacare, but today we're hearing nothing but fucking crickets. Now, basically, see, I'm in my 30s, but I'm old enough to know that before critical race theory, that Mr. Potato had in library books about gay teenagers were the greatest threats to America. I know it's hard to believe that anything could ever be more dangerous to all we hold dear, but once upon a time, millions of Americans were convinced that affordable health care had spelled the end of the Republic as we know it. They took to the streets, they mobbed town hall meetings and screamed bloody murder when the government proposed a law that would ban insurance companies from refusing to cover sick people and offered government help to people who could not afford the sky-high premiums that these companies had offered and charged. It seems to us like it's ancient history, but now, just a few years ago, the hottest, most contentious issue in America was the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which, for better or worse, is also known as Obamacare. Um, the Republican Party organized itself for almost a decade solely around a promise to repeal it. In fact, they actually voted to do so 67 times over the course of 7 years. As president at the time, Barack Obama would have vetoed any repeal, of course, but the act of voting against it was enough to keep the base in line, outraged and on the march from one election to the next. Back in 2016, right before Obama left office, all the Repub candidates had the Affordable Care Act repeal as had the ACA repeal as a top priority. Now, by that time frame, the program was becoming part of people's lives, and it was broadly gaining in popularity. So the GOP had landed on the repeal and replace as their slogan. I promise to enact something different but equivalent, the details of which they always failed to spell out. Inevitably, the best they could offer was some kind of vague, voluntary state-by-state insurance plan that would be more expensive and grossly inadequate. Nonetheless, it seemed to animate their voters like no other issue. The American Repugs just hated Obamacare even more than the ancient shibboleths of welfare and the affirmative action. Um, Now, Donald Trump, as usual, took the replace promise to new heights just before the 2016 election. He made this vow. He says, on my first day of squatting in office, I am going to ask Congress to put a bill on my desk getting rid of this disastrous law and replacing that with reforms that expand choice, freedom, affordability, and you're going to have great health care at a tiny fraction of the cost. It's going to be so easy, and it wasn't. And well, it wasn't so fucking easy. The House passed a terrible replacement bill in 2017, but it failed in the Senate by one vote after the legendary thumbs down by the late Senator John McCain, who was near the end of his life, but he wanted a final measure of revenge against Trump, perhaps over his spiteful comments about McCain's military record service. I think he was the last Republican before Liz Cheney to land a truly damaging blow against Donald Trump. Now, Trump tried to move on to tax cuts, but must have gotten some blowback from the base. In October of that year, he tried to have it both ways, tweeting as usual, "The Obamacare premiums will be up. The Dems own that, but we will repeal and replace and have great health care soon after the tax cuts," which never happened. Um, Now, by that particular time frame, Republicans in Congress were counting on the Supreme Court to gut the Affordable Care Act for them and kept a low profile on the issue. Now, nonetheless, Republican candidates for office still ran on the promise, and Trump kept saying that the bill was almost ready. So the base was supposedly still excited at the prospect, and it dampened a bit, no doubt, by GOP losses in 2018. Now, come 2020, as the 2020 election cycle began, Trump started campaigning on repeal and replace again, claiming that he would announce a new plan in 2 months, maybe less, and that didn't fucking happen. And as usual, he just started saying wherever he thought people wanted to hear, a plan would be ready in 2 weeks or by the end of the month, or he was just about to issue an executive order requiring health insurance companies to cover all pre-existing conditions for all customers, something that he claimed had never been done before. His sycophantic crowd cheered deliriously, no doubt believing that just as he surely finished his wall, he'd get that done in the second term as well. Trump lost an election in reality, if not in the collective imagination of his fans, so he never got to see the fabulous health care plan that would cost nothing and cover everything. Now, still, losing elections had never stopped the Republicans from running on the issue anyway. But repealing Obamacare was their holy grail for almost a decade, until they suddenly stopped talking about it. And so what the fuck gives? Why haven't we heard anything at all about it during this election cycle? Now, well, as NBC News reported, the Republican commitment to ensuring that millions of people suffer from unnecessary illness death, and bankruptcy isn't sexy anymore. But slightly more than a month before the next election, Republicans in Congress and on the campaign trail aren't making an issue of Obamacare. None of the Republican Senate nominees running in 8 key battleground states have called for unwinding the Affordable Care Act on their campaign websites, according to an NBC News review. The candidates scarcely mentioned the 2010 law or health insurance policy in general. In interviews on Capitol Hill, the key GOP lawmakers said that the desire for repeal has faded away. Now, the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's recent commitment to America made no mention of it either, although the chairman of the ultra-conservative Republican Study Committee did put on a plan that included an unspecified reversal of the Affordable Care Act's Washington-centric post. Now, when asked about it, however, he told NBC that it would be up to McCarthy, the presumptive incoming House Speaker, to put it on their agenda. Now, interestingly, while it's true that Obamacare is popular, it's not all that popular. A Kaiser Family Foundation tracking poll found that 55% of the U.S. adults approved of it, while 42% disapproved. So it's not like the GOP base hasn't come around. They're just bored with being angry about it and never been distracted by all the more exciting new grievances of the moment that we're facing. Now, repealing government-guaranteed health care has been a fundamental principle of the right, for the right wing for as long as I can remember. Now, Medicare and Medicaid, also known as entitlement programs, have been perennially known. They've been on the chopping block. Now, I assume Republicans hate it for the same reason that they've always hated it. The wrong people benefit from it, and that makes it unacceptable. They got no major problem with government social programs as long as they're targeted to real Americans, if you know what the fuck I mean. Now, over the past few years, however, the principles that have always been just below the surface of conservative hostility toward egalitarian government programs, it has evolved from implicit racial animosity to more explicit demands for racist policies and a full-blown assault on the democratic process. The impulses really haven't changed, but the right is now willing to experiment with extremist tactics to achieve their ends. Now, still, I would never say that they've entirely given up on repealing Obamacare. Now, Senator Rick Scott of Florida, the Senate Republican campaign chairman, doesn't specifically mention it in his audacious governing agenda. He still wants to rein it in, Medicare and Social Security, through unspecified cuts in benefits and services, and some things never change. I would imagine that Obamacare will soon be billed as another entitlement, which must be cut from for our own good. Now, for the moment, however, let's take a moment to recognize that Democrats managed to defeat Republicans in one of the biggest policy battles of this generation. The war, needless to say, continues on all fronts. Now, if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the about section of YouTube. And for just a little, as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.